This place was pure magic for millions of kids, a kingdom of dreams, of laughter, of wonder. And today, it's dead. Before Toys R Us became a myth, it was just an idea, and that idea belonged to one man, Charles Lazarus. He was in his early 20s, a young U.S. soldier just back from World War II. He didn't know much about markets, but he did know one thing. After a war, people have babies. Lots of babies. So in 1948 in Washington, D.C., he opened a tiny shop for baby cribs. He called it Children's Bargain Town. But soon, the parents realized they didn't just come back for the bed, they came back for the toys. And Charles understood, babies grow, but toy dreams, they grow faster. In 1957, he created something completely new, a store that sold just one thing, fantasy. The name? Toys R Us. Childish, bold, and that's why it was perfect. Because before everything died, there was this feeling. You know it. That magic. When you ran through the aisles with sticky fingers, everything was colorful, loud, full of adventure. It smelled like dreams, like Christmas, like childhood. Toys R Us wasn't a store. It was a wish list you could touch. A sacred place for childhood dreams. Founded in 1957 by Charles Lazarus, a man who believed in babies. Truly. Because his first business was selling baby cribs. But what parents really bought was a promise for the future. Quick reminder while you're deep in it. If this story is hitting you, don't forget to like, share, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Appreciate you. It was the era of thick catalogs, the time when you'd circle every single toy with a marker. Not because you wanted everything, but because you believed that in this store, anything was possible. Toys R Us became a giant, with over 1,500 locations around the world. A kingdom of plastic, cardboard, and endless wonder. Jeffrey the Giraffe became an icon, and the jingle was the anthem of your childhood. But while you were running through the aisles, the world outside began to change. Slowly, silently, and eventually, Toys R Us was no longer alone. Walmart, Target, and then Amazon. The competition became faster, cheaper, easier. While you were walking through aisles full of magic, others were already clicking through websites. And what did Toys R Us do? They watched. They held on too long to what once worked. And when they finally tried to go online, it was already too late. Because instead of building something of their own, they sold their soul to Amazon in the year 2000. A deal that cost them the entire online world. Toys R Us became invisible on the screen, and that was their first big mistake. You didn't notice it back then, you just wanted that one toy. But behind the scenes, the foundation had already started to crack. 2005, the day everything changed hands. But this wasn't a purchase out of love, it wasn't a rescue, it was a takeover with a death sentence. 3 investment firms took control. KKR, Bain Capital, Vornado, powerful names. But none of them ever emptied a toy register because they couldn't hold on to their pocket money. They did what these kinds of firms always do. They didn't buy with heart, they bought with debt. Over $5 billion in debt just dumped onto Toys R Us, like a concrete block tied around its neck. And then they said, now swim. But how do you swim when the water's up to the ceiling and every last cent is flowing into the pockets of men who never carried a single box in the warehouse? $400 to $500 million every year just for interest. Not for new stores, not for digital upgrades, not for you. The light stayed on, but the store was already clinically dead. And the worst part? While the world outside thought Toys R Us had just become old-fashioned, they had no idea that its heart had already been replaced by a contract. Toys R Us didn't die because kids stopped dreaming. It died because greed moves faster than memory. In September 2017, Toys R Us officially filed for bankruptcy after more than 60 years of business history. The reason? Over $5 billion in debt, no modern online infrastructure, and too little capital to stay competitive. But the bankruptcy alone wasn't the end. At first, there was still hope for a comeback. The goal? Modernize the stores, expand the online business, and gradually reduce the debt. But that plan failed because no buyer was willing to take on the entire company. In March 2018, the final decision was made. All 800 U.S. stores would be shut down. Roughly 30,000 employees were affected. Stores in Europe were also closed. In Germany, for example, some locations were sold to Smith's Toys, but the rest was liquidated. And just like that, Toys R Us disappeared. Not overnight, but within a few short months, from nearly every shopping mall. Toys R Us wasn't a failed company. It was a functioning business, until the buyout by KKR, Bain, and Vornado. What followed wasn't a business crisis. It was a financial strategy that systematically paralyzed Toys R Us. The end wasn't the result of bad ideas. It was the price of too much debt and too little control.